Welcome to part 3, negative impact. Now, I know we all in sales don't like negativity or even the word negative, and I chose this name very specifically because what this technique is not is exploring positive impact, right? I've taught this before where I just called it impact, and a lot of people misinterpreted what I meant by that, which is they thought it was about asking the customer, what's the impact of solving this problem? And that's not what we're doing here. What we're doing here is we are exploring the negative impact the problem is having on the business and on the people involved in the deal. Okay, so this technique, or this set of techniques, I should say, are what separate good reps from great reps. Okay, so everything you've learned so far will make you a good rep. You can be good at what you do by everything you've already learned. Mastering these next two pieces are what will make you great. They are what will predictably help you create urgency, access to power, and increase your deal sizes. Okay, so pay close attention to the next two sections and modules from this course. So you saw this image at the beginning of the course where we made the claim that discovery influences everything in the sales process going forward. Okay, it influences it. What you learn in discovery and throughout the discovery process influences what you do in your demo and how you multi-thread and the success criteria you set in your proof of concept, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what you're about to learn in this lesson will effectively double the amount of influence you have in each of those events. Okay, and you'll learn why that is. That's how important this lesson is. Now, these last two steps are that powerful because they are where raw emotion live, right? You will find emotion in the first three steps, but very often it's latent emotion, and sometimes it feels more logical than it does emotional. We're talking about business problems. As you explore the negative impact of those business problems and define a desired outcome and how the person benefits from that, you start to tap into emotion. And emotion is what drives purchase decisions. Okay, so we've all heard this phrase by now. People buy on emotion and justify with logic. Well, here's how you get them to buy on emotion. So before we move on, try to answer this question. How does building impact, I should say negative impact, maximize your success? Okay, I want you to be sold on the idea of doing this, and you are more likely to sell yourself than I am, although I'm going to try. So sell yourself for a second. How does building impact maximize your success and make you more successful as a salesperson? Pause the recording and try to answer that. Well, there's a number of different ways, but the three most common are these. With greater negative impact comes three mutually reinforcing forces. First, you ramp up the degree of urgency in your deal. As a result of ramping up the degree of urgency, your deal size is more likely to increase. Okay, people are willing to spend more to solve urgent problems. As urgency and deal size increase, your likelihood of accessing power increases, both because power needs to be involved in bigger deals and because they're thinking about urgent business problems. And all of that reinforces on itself. If you have access to power and you start there, you're more likely to find urgent business problems, which then in turn are more likely to increase your deal size. Okay, so these three are the powerful benefits of getting really, really good at exploring negative impact. Okay, and as you explore negative impact, your chart will go up and to the right. As you move to the right on impact and consequences of the problem, you go up in terms of urgency, in terms of power and access to power, and in terms of deal size. Now, this slide should look familiar. We covered this in the first section of this course, where we talked about peeling back the onion and asking why without asking why and getting to the center. Well, it turns out that this story, and I won't repeat it in depth here because you've already heard it, is also a story of building impact, right? So that's what peeling back the onion helps you do, although you're going to learn more techniques to build impact than just that, is as you learn why something matters and why that matters and why that matters, you learn more and more consequences and negative impacts and ramifications and ripple effects the problem is having throughout the business. Okay, and that is the definition of building negative impact, which again, in turn, helps you build urgency, deal size, and access to power. So in this module, we've got 2 left. You're going to learn how to intensify pain by exploring negative impact. And in the final module that comes after this, we'll talk about desired outcome. But for the next, say, 20 minutes or so, we're going to go deep on negative impact. So let's start here. What are impact questions? Okay, what are they? We have to start by learning what something is. You've already learned why it matters, and then we'll talk about how to do it. But even though this probably feels like a dry definition, it's important that you internalize this, okay? You have to know what it is to be able to use it consistently. And here's the definition. They are questions that ask about the consequences, effects, and negative impact of the buyer's business problem, okay? As we've talked about, they help you sell by building the seriousness and urgency of the problem so it becomes large enough to justify action, to get people involved, and ultimately spend money, right? Urgency, deal size, access to power. That's what impact questions are. So I'm going to put you into cold water a little bit, and I want you to go through this exercise with me. I'm going to list a handful of questions, and you've got to answer to get your brain exercised, whether they're an impact question or a problem question. Okay, do they explore consequences, ramifications, and negative effects, or do they surface problems? Okay, so do this dance with me. Don't skip through this. So the first one, how satisfied is your CRO with your average deal size? Okay, answer yourself. The correct answer here is this is a problem question. Okay, we're asking about a problem or satisfaction level with a deal size. Okay, how does the close rate challenge we've been talking about affect your customer acquisition costs? Okay, this is an impact question. We have a challenge, close rate challenge, and we're asking about an effect of that on something very specific in this case, customer acquisition costs. So it's an impact question. To what extent is your churn rate leading to customer lifetime value issues? This one's also an impact question. Okay, so we've identified the business problem, which is churn rate, and it's leading to another negative ramification, or at least we're asking if it does. Customer lifetime value issues. You're probably noticing a pattern so far. The word affect, the word leading to, you'll see other words like ramifications, impact, consequences. Okay, those are all telltale signs that we have an impact question on your hand, or on your hands. What's preventing you from decreasing your AE ramp time? Funny enough, this is actually a cause analysis question. Okay, so we're assuming the problem is AE ramp time, and we're asking what's preventing you from decreasing that. So technically that's a problem question, but it's a very specific type, which is cause analysis, which you learned in the last module. What are the ripple effects your lead generation challenge is having on the business? Okay, hopefully you're catching on by now. That one's an impact question. Okay, we're asking about the impact, or in this case, the way we articulate it is the ripple effects your lead generation challenge is having on the business. So what makes exploring impact so difficult? My guess is unless you're really, really good at what you do, you have asked very few questions like the ones we just covered in a live environment in your sales career. I bet you've asked between 4 or 5 total. Okay, these are very rare questions that salespeople ask. So what makes it so hard for us to actually do this? Well, knowing what makes it hard is how we start to overcome the infrequency in which we ask these questions. Okay, and so great impact questions demand 3 things, and that's why they're so hard to ask. First, they demand pre-call planning. Okay, unless you've been doing this for a long time, not just your existing job, but also asking impact questions, they tend to not come spontaneously. They come spontaneously to C-level executives, and you're probably not one yet if you're listening to this course. Okay, that's because impact questions are the language in which executives usually speak. So that's your first tip, is plan, just to get started simply, 2 or 3 questions, impact questions per sales call. Plan these out in advance so that you're not relying on the spur of the moment. Reason number 2 is business acumen. You have to have a strong degree of business acumen to even be able to ask these. Unless you have somebody really good in product marketing who defines buyer personas and the impact questions you should ask those buyer personas. By the way, I've never seen somebody in product marketing do that. Then you've got to have the business acumen to know what kind of impact the business problem you solve tends to have. Okay. And so it could be worth going to talk with a senior leader at your company and asking them that question. You say, hey, look, I'm working on mapping out the consequences of our business problem, the one we solve for customers, and I could use your help, right? What are 3 or 4 negative consequences of the problem we solve for companies that would really help me sell with more urgency? And the final one is domain knowledge, right? We kind of talked about this already. The more you know about your buyer personas, their pains, and the consequences of those pains and your solution, this becomes much, much easier, right? I've been selling to sales leaders my entire career. I know nothing else. And so I know exactly what problems they have. And more importantly, I know a myriad of impacts and consequences and ramifications of all those problems because I've been in my domain for a long time. And so if that's not you, immerse yourself, right? Talk to product marketing, talk to your buyers, interview them without it being a sales call, right? Do your own buyer persona interview. Read publications in your space or blogs. Make sure you get really good at this stuff. It is so underrated how much being a domain expert helps you become a great sales professional. We focus so much on sales technique and tactics, and so little on the foundation, which is being able to peer into your buyer's soul. You know them so well. So this is the 3-part framework for building impact. It's very simple on the surface, and I'm going to break down exactly how to do it. Okay, so step 1 is you're coming off of your business problem discovery. Summarize the business problem. Okay, you've probably asked 4 or 5 questions by now to do your cause analysis and validate the business problem, probably a few more than that. The most natural way to transition into impact is to summarize. Okay, let me see if I get this right, Mr. or Mrs. Customer. Here's what I've heard so far. Summarize the problem. Did I get that right? As soon as they say yes, now you move on to step number 2. Ask an open-ended impact question. Right, did I get that right? Yes. Great, can you help me understand the ripple effects this challenge is having on the business? Okay, I'll walk you through some more open-ended impact questions in just a second. And then step number 3, once you've springboarded into exploring impact with that question, is now you'll start asking targeted impact questions to bring awareness to things they might not be thinking about. Now you're not just asking an open-ended impact question, you're asking about very specific impacts to get them thinking. And we'll talk about why it's so important to ask an open-ended impact question before a targeted one, and I'll give you several examples of questions. But for now, remember at the beginning of this course, I encouraged you to write things down, to take notes. This is a great point in which to do that, right? This three-part framework, please remember this. It is so incredibly effective. I've never seen this not work. This is how you make exploring impact feel natural instead of manipulative and kind of rhetorical, which is very, very common. Okay, so I have already beat a dead horse on making this point, so I'm just going to show you what this looks like as we go on. But like I said, the first step is to summarize the business problem, which is these three parts: the problem, the current state you've understood, the cause analysis, and then springboard into asking for impact. So here's exactly what this would sound like. Okay, let's say they have a conversion rate issue, and I'm just gonna, voice over this. So step one, remember, is summarize. Step two is open impact. That is what this slide represents. So let me summarize what I've heard so far. You're looking to roll out a call coaching program for your AEs. And what's driving you to do that is conversion rates are sitting stubbornly at 20%, and your CEO wants to lift that to 25%. Now, when you think through the cause of this gap, the main issue is that your reps are feature dumping and not selling enough against pain, value, and outcomes. Did I get that right? So we just completed step one. The customer is going to respond, okay, great. So from here, can you help me understand the ripple effects this conversion rate challenge has on the rest of the business? That talk track is worth memorizing and inserting the customer's unique problem, right? I have never seen that not work. It is super effective and it feels so, so natural, and it gets customers opening up like floodgates when it comes to sharing impact. So I'm going to give you a few examples of open impact questions. Okay, so this is step two of that three-step sequence. Step one was summarize the business problem. Step two is ask open-ended impact questions. Okay, so here are a few of them, and then we'll continue. Earlier, I asked what challenges you were facing that would derail you, right? We started the conversation that way. Can you help me understand how that would derail you, right? So asking about how a problem would derail is asking about impact. Can you help me understand the ripple effects this challenge has on the rest of the business? I found the term ripple effects to be very effective. It's far more effective than saying the word impact, because for some reason, buyers have come to expect that from salespeople. So it feels a little bit manipulative. And ripple effect sounds like you've got a little bit of a extra business acumen than most salespeople. So give that a try. How is this challenge impacting the business as a whole? Right, try that one. Who else does this challenge impact and how? Right, you're seeing how pervasively this problem affects the rest of the organization, which, as a side note, will help you get access to those other people if you want them. What's driving you to solve this issue now rather than later? Okay, they'll start to speak to the urgency and why that urgency exists. So take a screenshot of this slide and just have it handy. It's a really good way to start practicing asking for impact, a really safe way to do it as well. Go give maybe 2 or 3 of these a try on your next few sales calls and see what happens. Now, let's start talking about the difference between open and targeted questions. Okay, so these are step 2 and 3 of that framework. Remember, step 1 was summarize the business problem. Step 2 was ask an open-ended impact question. And step 3 is ask targeted questions. Now, here's the difference between those last two. Open questions are open-ended and they allow the buyer to go whichever direction they choose. That is a very important point to understand. They give the buyer permission. They make the buyer feel in control of the conversation because you're not trying to funnel them into anything in particular yet. Targeted questions do funnel the buyer into something you want to funnel them into. They narrow the buyer's focus to something specific you'd like them to talk about. So an example of an open-ended question or an open impact question is, help me understand the ripple effects this conversion rate challenge is having on the business. They can go wherever the hell they want, right? They feel totally free to answer how they want. Now, an example of a targeted question on the same business problem would be, to what extent is this conversion rate issue affecting your customer acquisition costs? Right now we're funneling them in to a specific issue. And we're going to talk about how to use these two techniques together. Okay, so here's a couple more examples. Actually, this is the exact same example I just gave. I'm ahead of the curve today. This is probably worth screenshotting. So I'm glad I put it on a slide. But we'll skip through this. Now, here's the important point to understand between these two techniques. Why do you ask an open question before a targeted question? Okay, so think about that. I gave you a hint a few minutes ago. Try to answer that question before we move on. Here's the reason. We already talked about this. Asking an open question gives you permission to then ask a targeted question. Okay, so if you start by giving your buyer the freedom to go wherever they want and to feel in control, and you start that way, and then you ask a targeted question, now they will play ball with you. Okay, they feel in control of the conversation because you started by giving them control. And now you can start to ask your targeted impact questions without any negative ramifications. It works like magic. Now, if you did the opposite, let's say you summarize the business problem and you start asking very funneled, targeted questions, the buyer is going to freeze up and feel manipulated because you never gave them the freedom to answer how they wanted to. Now, even though in the first situation where you lead with an open question, you eventually do try to funnel them, they don't feel like they're being funneled because you let them go wherever they wanted to go as a way of starting that part of the conversation. Okay, this is a very important psychological aspect to understand to be a great SaaS account executive. It's so important. So here's a few examples of starting with an open question and then relaying into targeted questions. So here's an open one. How is this conversion rate impact or problem impacting the rest of the business? Buyer has freedom. They can go wherever they want. They don't even have to answer it. You've given them the freedom. That's the important part. Now we can start to funnel them. How is it impacting your cost of acquisition? Okay, they're not taken back by that because they already feel free. To what extent is marketing impacted by this as they think about generating leads for the sales team to convert? Is your CFO concerned with this metric due to its impact on cost of acquisition and lifetime value? Okay, that conversation will go incredibly well. And it's all because you started with an open question and then challenged your buyer to think about specific issues. The order in which you do that matters. Now, I realize this is probably the cheesiest slide you've ever seen. Don Draper, he's probably not the best representation of power, but you're probably not going to forget this slide either, so hopefully it's doing its job. I'm going to teach you how to use impact questions to gain access to power and other powerful stakeholders by asking who else style impact questions, right? When you ask who else this impacts, the person you're talking to starts to mention other people, and it becomes very natural and hard for them to decline when you say, feels like it would make sense to involve them in some conversations, right? So here's what this actually sounds like. After summarizing the business problem, can you walk me through who else this conversion rate issue impacts in your business? Okay. The buyer says marketing. They generate a lot of leads for us and they pay close attention to how we're converting them. They're also measured on revenue, so they have a vested interest in off conversion. And you say, I see. Notice that we started the first one with an open question, and now we're getting targeted. In my experience, many chief revenue officers look at conversion rates closely since it's a key efficiency metric in their annual plan. How is your CRO thinking about this? Big time. She straight up told us our SMB conversion rates are not sustainable and they have to be improved this year. Now, here's where you get access to this person. See, we've asked who this impacts. We're talking about the person we want to access. And now it's very natural to get access to this person that sounds like this. Makes sense. I hear this challenge a lot. If that's the case, one of the things I'd suggest in the near future is we arrange a group demo with her in attendance so she can see with her own eyes how this can positively influence conversion rates. Does it make sense to you that we include that as part of the way you evaluate this solution? You see, when you ask who else does this impact, the key principle is now it's very hard for the person you're talking to say, no, it doesn't make sense to include them because they've already talked about how it impacts them, right? It wouldn't be consistent with their answer for them to decline. Okay, so give that talk track a try. Ask who else is this business problem challenge or concerning, explore a few people, and then make a suggestion. Feels obvious that we should include them in the next meeting or two, given how impacted they are. Do you agree with that? Your compliance with gaining access to people will, in my best estimate, double by using that technique. All right, we've got a few more slides in this module. We are going to end with a couple exercises, okay? So the value of this video course is not me talking to you. It is you changing your sales behavior. And the bridge between you learning from me and changing your behavior is doing these exercises. So here's what I want you to do before you move on to the rest of the course. Articulate your business problem in the middle of a sheet of paper, right? So where you see the slide, it says the business challenge your product solves. Write down the business problem your product does solve in the middle of a sheet of paper. And then draw a few spokes, draw 4 or 5 spokes jutting out, just like you see here on the slide. And come up with as many negative consequences, effects, impacts, ripple effects, ramifications as you can that your business problem generates. Okay, you start with identifying the common consequences, and then you can start to design your questions around those. So pause the recording, do that exercise, and then I'll share an example of doing this with you in just a second. Okay, so here's what this looks like as an example. The business problem I chose, this one's familiar by now, is long account executive ramp times. Okay, so the first impact is, well, that impacts cost of acquisition. I'm over here on the left, right? If you've got a lot of AEs who are typically expensive and you're paying their base and they're not generating enough revenue, that impacts cost of acquisition, which is a key efficiency and scale metric. Going counterclockwise, the validity of our future hiring plans, right? A sales leader might not be able to hire more reps if he or she doesn't get ramp time under control because it's not scalable, right? Sales productivity per rep or revenue per rep is a big metric. Next, another negative impact, rep turnover and the costs associated with that. If you've got a really long ramp time, some reps may never get out of the starting block. They'll be 6 months in, they're not succeeding, and they turn over. And that can be a huge problem. That drives a lot of urgency for companies that have this problem. And then the final one I came up with, our ability to cover the market and grow market share, right? If you're hiring a lot of reps and they're designed to cover territories, to box out your competition and grab up market share before they do, but those reps aren't ramping, then your competitors are probably covering those territories better than you. And they're capturing market share as a result. which is a very painful ramification. So I hope you did this exercise. I hope you found it valuable. I really hope you actually did it, because that is the first step to changing some of your behavior, which is the first step to changing your sales outcomes. So as we come to a close on this third module, let's just do a quick recap. We covered a lot today, and I want to do this for the sake of repetition to make sure more of this sticks. Okay, so try to answer some of these. With greater impact comes three things. With greater impact comes blank, blank, and blank. What are those? Try to remember. I'm not going to tell you the answer. What's the definition of an impact question? Okay, what does it ask about? Try to answer that before we move on. Pause. The A players listening right now will pause and do this recap quiz. What's the difference between an impact question and a problem question? Impact questions are very hard to do. Great impact discovery demands three things. What are those things? Remember back a few minutes ago. All right, a few more and then we'll close out. What are the 3 steps to effectively building impact? Right, we talked about 3 steps. I'll give you a hint, they come right after exploring the business problem. Next, what are 2 examples of effective open impact questions you can start using now? Maybe write those down and go use them on your next call. What's the difference between an open question and a targeted question? And why is it a best practice to ask an open question before you ask a targeted question? What's the psychological aspect at play there? So hopefully you did that quiz. Hopefully it jogged your memory and made that stuff stick a little bit more in long-term memory. I really hope you did the exercise. And that brings us to the 4th and final module and lesson of this course, which is desired outcome.